Hello students and welcome to Ecology video number 5. This one is on population dynamics. So there's this lovely graph right here, and this graph is a pretty famous one showing the relationship between two different populations. We have our snowshoe hare on this blue line, we have our lynx on this red line. We know that the lynx is a predator of the snowshoe hare. The snowshoe hare is the prey. And we see that these two different groups interact with each other to impact the number of species that are there. That's the idea of this video. Different populations interact with each other to change the numbers that exist. So by the end of this, we should be able to see what types of factors impact the size of a population. So we know one is predator and prey. Let's look at what some others are. To begin our conversation about this, I want us to start from the beginning, to imagine that we are starting from scratch and building a whole new community. That process is actually called succession. So if you start with something and then slowly bring in a lot of other species, we're going to see these patterns that exist over time. So if we define succession more formally, we could say it's a change in the abiotic and biotic factors in an ecosystem over time. So let's think about that definition a little bit. First of all, abiotic factors are changed, which means the life that comes into an area changes the non-living aspects of that area. Also, the biotic factors are changed over time, so the life that comes into an area changes other life that comes into the area. There's two general types of succession. They're very similar. The big difference just has to do with the degree of starting overness that they are doing. So primary succession is going to be starting from the beginning, starting with an area with no life at all, and then building life over time. One thing that we can look for with primary succession is going to be if there's no soil. So inside of soil, there's a lot of decaying matter, and there's a lot of nutrients that plants can use. And before there's soil, it's going to take a long time to be able to get those nutrients. So primary succession, the first step in that is being able to build some soil. The second type of succession is called secondary succession. Secondary succession is going to be to a lesser extent because it has an established community and established soil to begin with, but some sort of disturbance gets rid of that community, and then there's individuals in that area that repopulate that community and it starts to grow again. If we compare with these two things, primary succession begins with no life, there's no soil present, it's in a new area like a new island. This is happening a lot in parts of Hawaii. Lichen and moss come first and biomass is low. Secondary succession is going to be opposite of that, but still starting from the beginning. Let's look at just a couple examples. So first, the top two represent primary succession. The big thing here is we're starting with bare rock. Whenever we're starting with bare rock, mosses and lichens need to come in first because they don't require soil. And then as they're there, they start to decompose some of the rock. They bring in some living matter, and that starts to create the soil. Once small amounts of soil have been created, then grasses can come in, ferns can come in, other small plants can come in. As the soil gets thicker and thicker, larger and larger plants can come in. Generally, if we're going through primary succession, we're going to start with smaller plants building up to larger plants, though that pattern doesn't always exist. These bottom two images represent secondary succession. These both represent fire, though there's many different types of secondary succession. This is just the example I found. So if we look at a fire, it is going to destroy or get rid of an already established system. Then once that has been destroyed, everything except for the soil has been destroyed. Everything else can start to come back in. That process is secondary succession. Okay, so if we're looking at things starting from the beginning, then there's some patterns we can look at if we're looking at a size of just a population. Up here at the top of this slide, there's just a reminder of the scale that we're thinking about. So ecology covers a lot of different scales. It covers populations of a single species. It covers communities with many different species. It covers ecosystems if we throw in those abiotic factors. It covers biomes over whole masses of our planet. We're right now focusing on the population level. So if we're trying to represent population size, there's 4 factors we have to look at in an area. First, we have to look at how many of that species are born. So we call that natality. So more birth, more natality. The other thing that can increase a population size is if more individuals move into that area. That's called immigration. So natality and immigration will increase the population size. On the other hand, death, like mortality is the word we use for that, and emigration, or leaving an area, those two things are going to reduce the population size. So if we're looking at the population size overall, all four of those factors need to be taken into account. When we are going through the process of succession, or if a species is moving into a new area, even if it's already established, there's going to be this population growth phases that occur within the species. And these phases are fairly predictable. The first thing that will happen is a couple individuals move into the area, and if the area is suitable for them, they're going to start to reproduce faster and faster and faster. Then all of their babies can have babies, and all of their babies can have babies, and the population is going to grow really, really rapidly. During this time, there's going to be tons of food, tons of space. There's not going to be much disease. There's going to be not a lot of competition from other stuff going on there. That is going to allow the population to grow really, 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 really quickly. After a time, we're going to get into phase 2. Phase 2 is called the transitional phase, and that's when growth of that population is going to stop. This is when they're sort of starting to run out of resources, or there's some competition existing limiting the population, or possibly there is too much poop accumulating. Something like that is going to start slowing the population. Eventually, we're going to end up this last phase. We call it the plateau phase, or carrying capacity. That's going to be where the largest number of individuals that can be supported in that environment exist in that environment. So the number of individuals can't grow anymore. This shape sort of looks a little bit like an S. It's called a sigmoid population growth curve. And those same patterns are going to exist often when things move into an area. The reason this is interesting is because you can actually represent this type of growth using math, and a lot of work has been done looking at human population growth and what might be happening in the future with our population. We're going to think a little bit more about human population growth in the next section we talk about with conservation. Let's think a little bit more about that idea of carrying capacity. So we represent it with the letter K. That's what you'll see in these equations and on these graphs. It has to do with the maximum number of individuals that a particular habitat can support. So that's going to have to do with all the things that reduce the growth. So reduce the relationship between birth, natality, and immigration compared to immigration and mortality. So things like the availability of resources, buildup of waste, disease, and all those community relationships are all going to impact the number of individuals that can live in an area. Those community relationships are the things that we saw at the beginning of this with the lynx and the hare. So we saw an example of predation, and because of predation, there was an increase in the population. Then, if there was more predators, the carrying capacity changed, and there was a decrease in the population. We see that same thing with mutualism, parasitism, herbivory, competition. All of these types of relationships will impact the size, the carrying capacity of different groups. So hopefully this is just a couple ideas that sort of represent sizes of populations, and as we get into looking more deeply into the idea of sizes of populations, we'll apply this to humans, we'll apply it in some other places. Hope this helps.